I'm OG, y'all new to the game.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. So welcome to today's webinar. Today's Business and Bodies webinar. It's all about high growth startups and where to begin. Hold on one sec. So a little bit of housekeeping and mindset stuff. Down the bottom of your screen, you should have a little more option. In there is a Q&A option. So in there, if you've got questions throughout, please put them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, sometimes I won't see them. So if you put them in the Q&A, then they'll sit there. It's a real good idea that if you've got specific questions to you or any other questions that think is going to help you with more clarity, to get more information, ask them in there. I will try and ask them at the right times. So just hold on if I don't ask them straight away, because we'll generally let people go with the flow of their conversation and try and interject when it's appropriate. But do ask those questions in order to get the most out of this. We'll go through today's themes. So today we're going to go through with Aiden's experience and his journey founding a high growth startup. We're going to go through, how do you go about executing and launching a new business, and lessons to look out for along the way. Today's experts and guests. So myself, the host, Mike Wooden. I run a digital marketing agency, helping people to grow their businesses online. And the man of the hour is Aiden Keneally. So he has successfully built up a business, a multi-million-dollar global business, EMGN Entertainment, which was once one of the fastest growing websites in the world. There's a bunch of other stats out there around how big he grew that in such a short amount of time. So I think at one point they were doing 30 million unique users a day, and was listed as one of the top 10 US sites, one of the top 500, one of the top sites globally in the top 500. He is also a venture capitalist and angel investor. He now advises other high growth startups, and he's also a director of a bunch of different companies as well.
All kind of right, except for venture capitalist bit.
Venture capitalist. So I thought your company Hole in One.
It is, yeah. I have a mixed relationship with venture capital.
Okay, cool.
That's good.
All right, so welcome, Aiden. Thank you for being on today's webinar. I'm looking forward to having you on to you. I actually met Aiden at Ryan's event at Sassive, funnily enough, and we had organised the meetup the following week just to have a bit of a yarn. I think I'd seen some of your stuff online, and then just by coincidence we happened to meet at that event. And I think Aiden left a good impression on me, so I'm happy to have him on the show.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Really good. Yep.
So what we'll do is I think we'll kick straight in. So Aiden has also just told me that he's got a newborn as well as his toddler, and trying to manage his online business life it's been an interesting time for him. So yeah, thanks again for jumping on with this. Let's jump in quickly. Aiden, why don't you just give us a slight background or a life story in 5 to 10 minutes about yourself and some of your experience.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think the where I came from, I have a background in genetics. That's and statistics. That's my training as such. I did do a degree in marketing as well, but science is basically my background. And then through a series of events, I was working in a good job at Fletcher Building back in 2011, 2012. And they went through a big restructure when they changed the CEO, and they did a whole bunch of stuff, right? And through that process, I was made redundant. then this was about mid 2012. Also had snapped my Achilles at that point, and so I had a chance conversation with a very young Sri Lankan guy who was trying to work out how to get his Facebook page a bit more attention. He had this kind of idea, and then through that and through just a series of testing and iterating on what was going to be quite an innovative business model, we ended up starting EMGN. And we kind of framed it that EMGM, which stood for Entertainment Movie Gaming Network, it was to have a mission. We didn't realize this at the time, but this is kind of where I get to later on for how businesses should be sort of framed and started, is that we had this idea, this model, and it had to pay for itself, because to me that was just common sense. I didn't really understand venture capital. I didn't understand what people would probably refer to as traditional startup systems. It was just, I'm a scientist, common sense says you have to make some money and you have to grow a business using retained earnings, right? That was just how I thought business worked.
Common sense is one of the most underutilized soft skills, I reckon, in business.
And so, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I could go into detail, but the short story of it is that we launched this website that was basically designed in a way to provide a mental vacation. And that's what we said. We just said, back in 2013, these were new, right? You couldn't access Gmail typically at workplaces. Facebook wasn't allowed at workplaces. That was, I don't know if anyone remembers that, but that was kind of the state for office working, right?
Yeah.
And so we said, well, I knew there was lots of research into micro breaks and how productivity can come from just having time out from desktops and stuff. So we said, well, why don't we just deliver content, real interesting content on a mobile website, and see if we can make some money through this idea of programmatic advertising, which is what Madhu was a real world leader in. We didn't realize at the time, but he ended up knowing a lot more about what is now pretty common digital advertising technology. He was one of the leading experts in that because he had just spent his youth understanding and working this stuff out. So we took an approach that just said, well, if we're going to try and distribute content to people, we've got all these channels that we can distribute through, including Facebook pages and all sorts of things. And we sell ads programmatically. So it was just him and I for the first year saying, right, well, if we post content to our website, send it through various channels, visitors can come back, they can look at the content for free, and we sell the ad space. Made sense. And I said, well, if that was to work realistically for a cash flow point of view, we just have to make sure that any costs we incur to distribute, we pay after we kept money in from the people that we advertise to. And it just turned out that because we were in New Zealand and because there was no advertising impressions here in New Zealand at that time, there was huge demand for ad impressions. It's a lot more nuanced and sophisticated now, but that was the opportunity, and we didn't realize it until we did it, but it meant that we could flip these contracts around so that we would be paid before we would owe our advertisers or our distributors, right? Plus we had an organic system. We had all sorts of things that came out of that. And it just meant that we were actually able to scale exponentially. So because we were in New Zealand and because the US, all of the audience was in the US and the ad agencies were all in the US, we just scaled this thing. And so within its first year, it was getting 1 million hits a day and making all this money. And we were basically making a margin on all this. We grew it all profitably and exponentially. And so there was an opportunity that we came into there, but the process of getting that right basically came from, like, I think originality comes from being ignorant to a specific problem, but knowing a bunch of stuff about other things. So you kind of work it out. And then just taking a real scientific approach to say, right, well, we're assuming this, let's work out if our assumptions can be turned into facts. And so a lot of that process now, I mean, the end result of ENGN was that we did that for 3 years, and then as content changed and the ad systems changed and Facebook started to become a bit more of a dominant player, and like we were part of the original advertising beta testing that is now Facebook advertising. Okay. And they were basically signaling it, going, hey, we're internalizing everything. We don't want people leaving the platform. Google was saying the same thing. So we said, well, our model's not going to last. And then there were people trying to aggregate these sites. So we said, well, cool. And it it went to one of those aggregators. We walked away with did very well and timed it perfectly. So that was kind of our thing. And yeah, so the process, and then basically looking back at it, was just that we were really good at working out scientifically how to do all this stuff, and it meant that we could just build a really solid business around it. And that's kind of what I do now with other companies, right? It's just, which I'm sure we can talk about now, but does that sort of answer the holistic question? I now kind of have since moved into the startup world in Auckland or New Zealand, because a lot of founders get, I think they get a bit of value out of hearing a different side, and probably just a different data point to say, well, it is possible to grow businesses, high growth businesses, without taking on too much capital, or being efficient with your capital, and just saying, well, you just have to think a bit unique, you know, and you have to work it out. And that's part of the challenge. Don't just assume that you should be building businesses to spend money and taking on series of capital and blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that's where I fit.
I think that's really cool, and I think I was saying this to you before we started, that I think that there'll be, you know, a few people that can relate to that, you know, being made redundant story at the moment, and sort of, you know, potentially looking at their options around, you know, what do I do now, or potentially there are business owners who are kind of at this current point in time going, well, you know, our revenue's struggling, or what's ways that we can diversify, or what's other things that we can be looking at. So I think that's a really cool story.
Yeah.
You know, to go that at a moment of, you know, hardship or redundancy, if you will, and then plus a snap, what was it, Achilles?
Yeah, snap my Achilles tendon.
Snap your Achilles tendon.
I had my foot on the couch, and I couldn't end up going to job interviews or anything. So I just said, well, forget that. It was because it was coming into Christmas. I was like, oh, you know, I'll just work on this thing. And I was like, oh, that actually seems all right. And it turned into something really cool. Yeah.
Oh, it's cool. And then, you know, you obviously built that up by, you know, creating engaging and entertaining content for people to consume and look at. I guess today's equivalent would be the same as being like, you guys were early creators of memes and I guess humorous content and entertaining content that people would, I guess, like and share and have a laugh at. And then
that was part of it. Yeah.
Sorry?
Certainly part of it. Yep.
Oh, yeah. And then people would come to the site, look at it, and then at the same time you would sell advertising space. And then as the users grew, you could sell more advertising.
Yeah, it was a case of basically what we ended up saying to both parties, right? Was we can have as many impressions as you want, and we can address whatever audience you want. And it was sort of in an instant where, and a lot of part of the reason we were able to do it for so long was because we were able to actually evolve with the changes that rapidly happened in that particular space. So when we first started, you would actually have a desktop website on a mobile interface, and you'll be selling desktop ads, right? And it was the first original thing that got us really kind of thinking, because it was like, well, you could fit 8 ads into a single mobile screen and then get a mobile visitor, but they pay desktop rates. But we looked at it and said, well, that's not going to happen forever. People are going to figure this out, right? So how do we evolve this? And then mobile websites became a thing. So ad density on a mobile website was a big problem we had to work through, and ad displays always change. So we had to work out, well, what do we do if and when these things change? So we had systems for that. And nobody was really thinking in that kind of way. We just said, well, where could this thing fall over, and where can we take advantage, and what do we expect the trends to be? And we kind of knew the trends could go either way. So we just had this prioritization of flexibility into our business, and we knew everything we did had to be flexible so that we could evolve and move as this industry matured. And content was a part of that, because not only was it, well, at the time, I Can Has Cheeseburger, I don't know if you remember those, if anyone remembers that, but they raised, I think, about $30 million, and they were the original cat meme people.
Oh, yeah.
And they went around acquiring picture sites that had lots of pictures on them, and created memes, and ended up falling over because it became kind of long form content, and then video became a big thing. And so the form of content was always going to change. And you can see that now in instant articles for Facebook. I mean, video is always going to be a big thing. Live content like this, or, you know, content changes and develops, and you have to have the systems and the monetization strategies behind it to work. And what we had at ENGN wouldn't work in today's society, but we kind of understood that. So that's why we timed for our position rather than trying to take on too much change. If that makes sense?
Yeah, you got you.
Yeah. And just being aware of that was a big thing. Was apparently a big insight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you obviously got I guess one of the keys, what I'm hearing from you, one of the keys to your success is having foresight to I guess predict where your industry is heading and where, you know, some of those changes are going to come in, and whether or not you want to stay competing in that space and adapt, or whether or not, you know, you guys sell out, which is what you guys chose, right?
It's one of the big things I do advise a lot of companies on now, and a lot of founders on, is that if you're starting a new business, you have to have an identified trend that you're kind of playing a part in, right? So in property, I'm dealing with a couple of property tech companies at the moment, but the trend that they have identified that you kind of have to validate, right? It's not saying that if you have the insight into the trend that no one else has, then you're going to win. But the trend is that the agent is moving away. They're becoming more important than the agency. And there are all sorts of things that validate that. So the way that you can see, if you get any real estate agent stuff in your letterbox, the agent is the forefront of their marketing. They have their own brands, and then somewhere in the mix there might be a Ray White at the bottom. So that trend is then what these companies are going, right, well, if that's happening, then we can support it with this type of solution. A lot of people don't quite get that, but they say, right, I see a problem, but you kind of go, well, is this fighting a trend? Is this in line with something that's going on in the broader market? And what would happen? So if you know the trend, then you can kind of navigate through. But if you're kind of just saying, right, I'm independent of it, you just have this unknown force that could swipe you out. It could do anything. You might get lucky, you might be right, but that trend analysis and understanding what you're kind of playing a part in is actually really important when you do start a new business, or try and evolve your current offering, or pivot, or do whatever else you might do in it.
Yeah, interesting.
Or tactical sense.
I'd love to unpack that a little bit
Sure.
around, you know, what would be a good way for a business to go around identifying a trend and coming up with some kind of, I guess, hypothesis, if you will.
That's completely context dependent, but my personal feeling on that is I have this value of trying to know a little about everything. Like, so breadth of knowledge is far more valuable to someone like me than a really real narrow expertise in something. It ends up becoming that you become an expert in a field by doing that, but having the ability to take pieces from all around everything lets you sort of formulate opinions and ideas that other people can't see. That's always my philosophy. It just says, well, I know a bit of this and a bit of that, and those things correlate. Oh shit, okay. And there's a lot of scientific theory that actually applies to business, which
it's almost like fusion cooking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But you can say, right, so if you know that the general,
like a bit of this recipe, bit of that recipe.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you know the general themes, so data is the new oil is always a big one that okay, the most valuable companies in the world are all ones that have the ability to funnel and acquire data, and then that is kind of the real value driver for a lot of what we're seeing in e-commerce and logistics and all sorts of things. So if you know that, then you can go, right, well, how do I know that this general idea of data as a service or data as a commodity, how does that play into what I want to do in my digital agency, or how does that play into what I'm trying to achieve here? And if you know that Facebook in particular is saying, well, video and keeping people on the platform and and being relevant to an aging market, all of these things you can just pick up by just listening to the news and podcasts and all sorts, and go, right, well, how does that play into what I want to do in my small business? That kind of stuff is what you do to assess trends, and it's just being present in a broader I don't know, a broader set of just keeping your eyes up and keeping your knowledge diverse.
Another follow up on that is, so I'd imagine that, you know, if you are someone, or if I'm just trying to put this in the context of people who might be watching as well. So let's say, for instance, we've got people who are listening and watching, and they feel like they've identified a trend. How would you feel around, like, how would you go around, A, do you reckon validating that, or B, just having the confidence to follow your nose? Because if you're a trend spotter, chances are you're one of the only people. And so if you bounce that around your circle, you're going to get a lot of "you're crazy."
Yep. That's part of it. That literally is a part of it. And so I have this philosophy that everything is an assumption. And then you just think, if you take a continuum and assumption is here and fact is here, you can do things to prove out your assumptions and turn them into a body of evidence. That's the key mindset. And then you just have systems that can prove one way or the other. So you know exactly what you're assuming. Because if you don't know what you're assuming, then that's where an us out of you and me type thing comes in. You say, look, this is an assumption. You don't say it's fact. You just say, I'm assuming that things are going to go this way, right? How do I prove that right or wrong? Then work out how to prove it right or wrong. And that's where your systems and your processes for early research to when you actually, like at ENG and all the businesses I work with now, I encourage people just to say, write them out, write the assumptions out, put them on the wall, wherever you need them, so that everyone in the business knows what everyone's assuming, and they can all work towards proving that out right or wrong. Yeah. And then in terms of getting people, you know, dealing with critique, I guess, or being comfortable to validate your assertions, flip it around. Mindset. And so the mindset of a founder or a business leader or a business owner should be trying to figure out where your product is shit. It should be trying to figure out where the flaws are. Like, encourage feedback, encourage people to try and knock stuff down. Because if it falls down because it's not well thought out, then you don't have a good business, right? So you want to know where the hole, you want to know how to poke holes and how to fix them. And then if nobody can tear it down, you know you've got a robust thing, right? And that's what you should be seeking. So you shouldn't be offended if people like critique you. I mean, ideally, they're not going to personally attack you and say you're silly, but just say, well, have you thought about this? What about this? I know this, and this is an issue I've seen. You go, great. Fuck yeah, I'm going to build that into my thinking and just make my thinking more robust.
Yeah.
And that's the skill set, right? But I think a lot of people are a bit, the confrontation of that.
I think there's also something in there around finding the right people. I'll pose this question. Is there something in there around finding the right people to do that for you? Because I think in New Zealand, especially in New Zealand, I think we've kind of got a couple of different people, right? We've got people who are highly opinionated who will let loose online, and probably their opinion, you know, they might have something completely unrelated field of expertise. Then you've got other people who are just really passive, who just, if something's wrong, they won't say anything. They will just not use it.
It's a broad. This is literally a very broad and nuanced subject, but in general, I talk about bullshit filters. Yeah. Founders need to know what they have to establish their own sort of filtering mechanisms to say, is this person I'm talking to credible? Is the information they're giving me credible? How do I filter it for my needs? And then how do I sort of package it and present it for my team or for my own use, right? And you get a huge amount of feedback from all sorts of places, whether it's directly from talking to people or if it's from seeing trends online. I mean, there's all sorts of areas you can get feedback to prove out your assumptions, but you do have to be able to filter it. And there are more credible places to get feedback than not. And just understanding that is also part of the game. If you go to your parents or your wife or spouse and just say, what do you think of my idea? Yeah. Just know the bias will either be, that's fantastic, honey, whether it is or not. Yeah. Or it might be, what are you doing? You're silly. You know, whatever your family dynamic is, that's going to actually be a part of the feedback. So you go, well, do I need independent feedback? How do I compare the feedback from my wife to the feedback from my business partner? Whatever it might be, that's all part of it. And you can sort of teach that to a certain extent. You just have to be comfortable and just doing it and getting more feedback, you kind of get a sense of confidence as to where your thinking is. And I see that a lot with the founders I work with. They kind of start here and end up here, and I just kind of, it's just by doing it and knowing some of that kind of nuanced stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk around your kind of, your closest support network, like your parents and your partner and stuff like that, and being aware of their biases. So that's why I laughed as soon as you said it, because I'm like, I instantly thought of a number of occasions where I've taken an idea to my parents or something like that, and I kind of, now I really put a filter on sort of their feedback type thing. So some of it's like, if I'm planning to design something where I need people who have no concept of technology to understand, I'll ask for their opinion. But if I need to work with people who are not their age bracket or they're not the target audience, I'm like, this feedback is going to be useful.
It literally is all context dependent as to what you're trying to assess or validate or whatever. I mean, my wife provides me with fantastic and real feedback, and I encourage her. I just say, look, tell me where my thinking is terrible, and she will. She's a very good communicator, right? So she's not trying to put me down. She says, this is wrong, like this is great, fantastic, that's perfect, that's exactly what and that's in all aspects of everything I'm doing, right? But we've worked through that and gone and said, this is kind of, if I come to you for feedback, this is kind of what I expect. And she's getting tested it, and now she's like, I know that you can handle a lot of crap. But that's also part of the founder thing, is that's how you develop the trusted advisory thing. When I advise founders, we start by going, you and I need to have a trusted relationship, because we do have to talk about some interesting, often taboo subjects, like how much money you're making, and your personal situation becomes a part of you growing this business, because businesses aren't.
And that's obviously a hell of a lot easier when you trust someone than versus.
Correct. And you got to take the time and effort to do it, and say, these are the frameworks. This is how, I say to people that I work with, I say, look, I'm not necessarily a direct person as such, but when we have to be direct, I will frame it. I'll say, hey, Mike, I'm going to be direct here. And they know to listen and go, great. Whatever comes is not a personal attack, but you can be direct. And framing an opinion. Hey, Mike, this is my opinion, so you can filter it as you need. Boof. And then they know, great, that's not you advising me, that's just an opinion. Those types of things you can build out as a business owner, to get feedback, to interact with community, to do all that kind of stuff. But it's just the softer techniques for just operating and being present in the market.
Cool. So if we had to kind of lay out, and of course, granted that a lot of things we're talking about is very broad complex, it's hard to give blanket advice or whatever. However, if we were to let's say, for instance, people have got new ideas that they want to launch, or new online business models that they want to launch, what do you think would be a good process for starting?
For starting, hang on, sorry, I'm seeing a phone call. I guess so I always say, any new initiative, whether it's a product or if it's a business, it has to sort of fit two things. You kind of have to know what the purpose is. So you say, why should this thing exist? And then, what is it trying to achieve? And those are the two really fundamental questions, because you say, well, a mission statement in any regard is what's this thing trying to achieve? What does success mean, right? And then, why does this business exist is what Simon Sinek terms the why, right? It says, this is why what we're doing is important. And if you take those two answers, the answers to those two questions, you have the beginning of the purpose of your business or of your product or of your idea. And that becomes the foundation for everything that you do. And it may sound a bit naff, but getting that right, and it can take a long time to get that right, because you kind of have to work out the nuance and the level of what the purpose of the business really is. But that then just makes everything else downstream from that so much easier. So if you're an online business, you have to kind of go, what are we trying to achieve with this? Is it if you're a service business, is it I'm trying to improve the service industry in a particular way, or hey, there's nothing wrong with having a really small niche business. You might be saying there are these types of, business owners that look kind of like this. I'm simply there to be the support mechanism for them online. And that's you can achieve that, right? For me, my mission is to help founders be better than yesterday every day, or to help founders realize their vision for success. And so I can do that in a number of ways, but that's my mission. And why is that important? Because they need this kind of support often at an early stage so they can grow their businesses exponentially. And that bit is just where you start, hands down. And if you don't have that, you'll often find the struggle for marketing, so if you can't work out how to advertise your product, if you can't work out target audiences, all of these things that come as a symptom, or it's really expensive to advertise, and Google, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, it's usually because you haven't got the purpose right. And when you get the purpose, you kind of then naturally just take off, because right, I'm going to target this way, my message should look like this. And you can explain why it's important to people and they engage with it. So that's really where I would start if I was starting an online business, and take the time to get that right.
Oh, so you look at developing your purpose, what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to help. And then is there a way you reckon people should go around testing their concept or testing their idea before they go and, be like, oh, I'm going to put $50,000 behind this, or go get, I'm going to go and approach Hole-in-One Ventures and make Aiden listen to my pitch about
I think
about something crazy.
That's where the assumption bit comes in. Just really be clear what you're assuming, and then work out. It's the lean method, which is ultimately the scientific method. I don't know if people are familiar with it, but
is that the lean startup?
Lean startup, yeah. The way that you want to get as much information as you can as quickly as possible, and the best way to do it is to hold lots of micro experiments, right? Break it down and just make sure that you're testing and validating at a really small scale, but rapidly. So the more tests and cycles you can do, the cheaper that process becomes, and the more information you can get, and the more nimble you can be with how you actually discover what you want to be doing. So the step for starting an online business is not to go all in. It's to work out where you want to go, and then just how you can continually learn from it. And so if it's online advertising, this is the A/B testing for Facebook advertising things. You just say, look, I want to see if this title works better than this title, and you put $10 behind it. And $10 should give enough indication to say, well, this one's better than that. And then you might go, right, $20, then yep, $100, and then yep, okay, that's actually a good ad. Cool, that's part of my advertising strategy. And you can take that to all aspects of the business, business name, branding, the purpose. And you can go to people and say, hey, look, if I was to say I'm trying to do this and this is why it's important, how does that resonate with you? And people might go, yeah, it's a really good idea. Or they might go, don't get it. And you just have to take that, I don't get it, and go, okay, that's not them being dumb. That's them giving me good feedback that I need to change my purpose. And then you change your purpose and talk to them again. It's not rocket science. It's not hard work, but you do have to be open to that feedback. And this is all ties in, right? So
yeah, 100%, I can see it. The thing is, as you're talking, I'm making a lot of connections as you talk. Yeah. And if you see me looking off screen, I'm actually writing notes.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So if you see me like this is me writing notes. Yeah.
And so, that is quite specific feedback for people. How you do it with whatever you're trying to achieve needs probably a bit more of an interaction to say, well, specifically, these are the things that an individual could do. But in general, it's that rapid cycling feedback. It's being open to feedback. It's all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's having a real clear purpose. Yeah.
It's interesting. So I did have a question that popped up as you were talking, right? So, and this is obviously pertaining to myself personally. I'm quite an emotional person. And a lot of what you're talking about is quite formulaic or quite non-emotional. And I guess what my question was is kind of like, cool, I see that there's a need to, the North Star or that purpose is really valuable in helping to remove some of that emotion, because when you're looking for feedback and criticism, etc., you're not looking for personal attacks. You're looking at, does my purpose stack up? And that's kind of my North Star, and that helps guide you through a little bit. I guess the challenge, or one of the questions I had there, is what's the balance between passion and being just really formulaic if you don't have that passion behind it as well?
So I would argue what I'm discussing isn't necessarily formulaic. It's just a way of breaking down a problem.
Process, maybe?
It's just the scientific method. Literally, that's all this is, right? Which is the best technology humans have ever existed, right? Ever created. There you go. But the emotion is really important. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. Like there's no formula to creating a business. Right? And I always say that the founder's job, or the leader's job, or the CEO's job, or the product manager's job, whatever role you play, it's empowering people to get behind your vision and your mission. So that's the first bit, and that's the emotion bit. You have to be really clear that if someone's going to come in and work with you or help you or advise you or even work for you, it's to achieve that mission, right? That's why it's really important to get right to begin with. And then your job is to inspire and empower people to believe in that mission, and then give them all of the resource and the leeway and the environment to succeed. And that's all the job of a founder really is. It's to passionately explain why people are going to give up their time and effort to come and help you achieve the mission you're setting. And then your other role, which is part where the process stuff comes in, is just make sure that they can do that, right? Real broad, but emotion, passion, it's a vital part of it. So it's just, you got to tailor it correctly. You don't want to get upset when people give you feedback, but you do want to have empathy for your staff. You want to have and you want to be you. Your business is going to be a representation of you. So don't make it something that's not authentic to you, because that's shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the reverse. So you talked around a few things there around good ways to start out if you're wanting to, launch a new business online or test a new idea. And I guess not doing those would be pitfalls that you see people come into. But let's maybe talk around now that you're in a position where you are advising a lot of high growth startups, you're seeing a lot of people, I guess, pitching for investment and that kind of thing. What do you think some of those pitfalls and watch outs that people should be wary of, or that the traps that people fall into when they're starting out on this journey?
That's context dependent. I mean, I think if you're raising money, if that's a particular thing, my first question is always, should you be raising money? You kind of need to think about startups or new businesses as things, you have to kind of figure out where your revenue is coming from. And the two ways to do that is to convince a customer to give you their cash in return for a product or service, or an investor to give you their cash, right? Customers is always number one. So you should always work out, can I do something that will attract an early customer to give me revenue? That's where you should always start. You shouldn't ever start to say, how do I get an investor to give money so I can go and find a customer? That's a real common one that I hear, and people just assume you need to get investment to grow a business. You don't. Then it's kind of looking at it and saying, actually understanding the role angel investment and venture capital actually play. So I kind of always frame it that an angel investor should come in to help validate or build a product to a certain extent, so you can have something to then go to customers, and that's the role angel investment broadly plays. Venture capital then really is designed for accelerating sales and marketing growth. So you kind of have to have something proven that is a value proposition that's in market, potentially proven, for a venture capital firm to come in and do what they're really supposed to do, which is to accelerate growth. And
Yeah.
and I have issues with that model, but that's kind of what it's there for. So you kind of have to know where to target your efforts. So like, do I have a product? Yeah. Do I want to accelerate marketing and sales growth? VCs. Do I have an idea but no capital to kind of get it off the ground, and I can't get a customer early to come and help me with that? Great. Then go to an angel investor, and that's where they play, right? And then there's always pros and cons. So you're selling part of your business, you're kind of tying yourself to a third party, which will have an influence over your business. So be aware of all of the issues that can come from that. Can be huge positives from that as well. A good angel investor will be they can be a real asset. But again, that's where that conversation gets a bit more nuanced.
And obviously someone who is obviously there's the reverse of that can be true as well, right? So yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think that a lot of people will invest too much time or too much money into an idea before they've gone through that process of, I guess, micro experimenting and validating their ideas?
Yeah, definitely. People often think, I have a problem, here's a problem, I want to create a solution. And I kind of challenge that thinking a lot. Right? So you kind of want a mission to change something in the world, right? A mission that you can succeed in, and then the problem solution system sits below it with a product. So you don't want to build a business just on a particular product. You can do it, and it can work that way. But if you're kind of going, look, I've got this broader mission. So some of the companies I'm working with, their mission is to not have any dyslexic kids feel the way the founder felt when he was younger. Like, that's their mission. And one of the ways they're doing it is through, a particular product. Then they've got another service that they can offer. And this is growing a bigger, more holistic business to solve this problem of dyslexia, right? Whereas if they just focus on one of those products and build a business around it, they're kind of missing the bigger piece. And it also means that you can test and provide, test and move within that broader mission for any product ideas. And there's all sorts of things you can do just for that mindset shift. Whereas a lot of people I talk to say, I've got an idea. How about we do this and this and this? And it limits the ability to actually develop that into a proper mission-driven business. And then people get really tied to their ideas. They are personal, they are thought out, people put a lot of time and effort into them, and it can be really hard for people to, understand that they may have missed something. And there's nothing wrong. It's a very human thing, and I'm not saying that people are like, that's a very normal thing to have felt, but you've got to be kind of used to getting over that. Yeah. And I've had heaps of people challenge me on my thinking, and I just have to accept, yeah, cool. I need to think differently, right? I'll change my opinion. Great.
I think you touched on this earlier as well, was the ability to filter that, I think, is a good skill to hone as well, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that have challenged your thinking that you've also thought, well, you can just piss off. So.
Yep, definitely. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, cool. Hey, I think that's pretty good right there. So I don't know if you've got any closing comments or anything else that you'd like to add to anyone.
It's been fun.
Cool, man. Yeah, I think it's been really good. I mean, I've personally got a lot out of this webinar because I was writing notes and just been like, oh, that's good way of thinking. I like the way you think. I like the scientific approach, and I like the methodologies behind, sort of doing things in a step-by-step process, having that North Star, doing micro experiments, testing your assumptions. And I've actually seen that come through. I've obviously had the ability to talk to a couple of people in similar shoes to you who have developed really big online businesses. And that's something that I've seen reoccurring a little bit, is that, one of the guys, I've got a guy that who I sort of, I guess I catch up with regularly, and he does similar things, right? So he has all these new ideas, online business model ideas, and he does exactly that. He sets some targets and goes, right, this is my little micro experiment. If this doesn't work, then we're changing. If this doesn't work, then we're changing.
one of the things we never talked about is that, but it's something for people just to consider, is that back in, I don't know, 10 years ago, it used to cost a huge amount of money to spin up server. Like you had to have physical servers and things on premises and software and people to support them. And there was a huge amount of capital cost that was involved with starting up online businesses, right? Well, they weren't even referred to like that. You had to have all this stuff on prem. The cost to start and to test business ideas is just nothing now. That's why you can and should adopt that kind of system. You just say, look, I've got an idea. I can contribute $100 to this and just validate the core bits of it. And the world and the technology allows for that now. So you should be comfortable with that's kind of the right way to do it. And I think people then also they get stuck in this idea of like, I need a developer to help me with my idea. And you sort of say, well, prove it analog first. Like, what's the core thing that you're doing that would solve some problem or that would build towards your mission? And once you kind of get that right and you can prove that you're right, then go invest in the developer, and it'll be a lot easier for the developer to build something of use. That's just the mindset that's needed, and you can do it real cheap, and you can be you just get good at doing it, and that's where the entrepreneurial thing comes in.
And I think you're also touching on something else, which is a reoccurring theme, is a lot of people, like you're saying, a lot of people think they need to get a developer straight away. A lot of people have these sort of hang-ups. The other thing I would just add to that is I also think a lot of people think it has to be perfect.
Oh yeah. Hell no. It's a great point. some of the crap that you just, it's not never crap actually. You just never know what the value proposition for a third party is. You may think you know, and then I've seen it happen hundreds of times. You put a product out there, and then the way it gets used is completely different to what you assumed. And you talk to them and go, oh, well, we don't care about all that stuff that you debated 20 hours last week to get right, the font colors and stuff. No, we really like this. And you go, okay, cool. And so the quicker you can get that kind of happening without spending all the waste of what you think might be of use. Exactly. That's a really good point.
Yeah, so we've been, I think it's come up in the last maybe 3 webinars is, like whatever you launch, and you could spend years trying to plan out every single scenario, and whenever you launch, you're going to find 100 things you never thought about.
Correct. That's why you just do it quickly, get it out there. I mean, you don't want it to be insecure. You don't want it to be broke. Like, you don't want it to be broken, but you kind of just say, well, I don't need a full suite of stuff. You just kind of say, I want to prove this point. What's the barest way I can do that efficiently? So you don't have to do design into that. And then you go, cool, that's what I'm testing. And then right? And yeah, the really good founders do that really, really well.
I actually saw it was a saying or a quote from, I think it might have been Martin Scorsese, the director, right?
Yeah.
He's like advising young wannabe directors, and he's saying, listen, if you're not incredibly embarrassed by your very first attempt at a movie, you put it out too late. Correct.
Video content and marketing, which is online, a portion of online business systems, right? There are heaps of really good content creators that will tell you the same thing, that they will start with an iPhone and their selfie kind of mode. And as long as what you're talking about is really valid, people will engage with it. And then I would always argue that with video content in particular, sound is more important than visual. So if people get good sound, they can tolerate a lot of stuff on the visual. So don't get too caught up on that. Just get caught up on the messaging and the sound quality. And a company I'm working with, we've just proven that. It was like, these guys were spending thousands on video editing, and these videos weren't getting anywhere. They started recording through a webcam and just chatting like we are, and these videos now take off. And you're like, yeah, it's not the cost in production and whatnot, it's the ability to record. They can do that 10 times cheaper. They can release 10 times as much content, so they can prove it over time. And yeah, that's a real world example of it. Yeah.
Cool. If people, are you happy for people to reach out and connect with you on LinkedIn and stuff like that, or have a yarn?
Yeah,
if they want to have a chat or talk to you around anything else? That
I mean, basically, my whole thing here is I do this for the love of talking to founders and helping founders, right? So there is a portion of what I do, which is the paid advisory. But my broader ambition is just to be present and be useful and to help, I guess, validate and improve New Zealand startup ecosystem. And that's just talking to people, that's networking, that's saying hello, just and getting an understanding of what people are doing, because that helps me network and connect the right people with the right people.
Keeps you connected in the ether.
Yeah, I'm trying to be a bit more present in New Zealand, which is cool, and there are lots of cool people around. So,
Awesome.
it's part of my day job.
Mate, I love it. It's cool. Hey, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this. We'll put the
thank you as well. And
yeah,
thanks
awesome.
to everyone there.
No worries. Yeah, so
Cool.
we'll put the replay up on businessandboardies.com. I'll fire out an email as soon as I've got it ready to go. But yeah, thanks again, Aiden. Appreciate your time. Look forward to catching up next time.
Yeah, it was great fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.